I'd moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of a quiet town. Figured it'd be peaceful here, just me and my dog Bailey. One night, though, that peace was shattered. I was up late watching TV when I heard a noise outside. First, I thought it was some raccoon in the trash, but then Bailey started growling. He's usually pretty calm, but his hair was up, teeth bared at the window. I turned down the volume and stood still, listening. There it was again, a low crunch like someone stepping on gravel. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the front door, heart pounding. When I opened it, I scanned the yard, but saw nothing. Just as I was about to head back inside, I heard it again, that crunching, but this time it was coming from behind me, near the garage. I whipped around, flashlight aimed, but still, nothing. I went inside, locked the doors, and tried to calm down, but Bailey wouldn't settle. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, I dozed off on the couch, but it didn't last. A loud knock woke me up. It was past midnight. I froze, barely breathing, just listening to my own heart racing. Another knock, then 3 loud bangs. I went to the door, cracked it open, and found no one there. Just an empty porch and Bailey whining at my side. In the morning, I found footprints around the house, stopping under my bedroom window. They didn't belong to any neighbors. No one had been around. This happened a few nights in a row. Each time I checked the house, but it was always empty. Then, I noticed my phone had a message, a voicemail left at 2 a.m. I pressed play and my stomach dropped. There was only breathing, slow and steady. After a long pause, I heard my own voice from weeks back, when I'd left a voicemail for my mom. Someone had saved it and played it back to me. That was it for me. I packed up and left that place, got out of that town entirely. I don't know who was watching me, or why, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Bailey and I are in a new town now, but I still keep the lights on at night, and I don't answer the door after dark. It happened when I was driving home one night from a friend's house. It was late, past midnight. I was taking the back roads, surrounded by woods on both sides. The kind of road where you rarely see another car. Halfway home, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror. Its headlights were bright, too close, almost tailgating me. I thought maybe they'd pass, but they stayed right behind. I slowed down, hoping they'd just go around. But the car slowed, too. This went on for miles. Just me and them. I could feel my hands gripping the wheel tighter. Eventually, I pulled over to the side of the road, thinking maybe I'd let them pass. But instead, they pulled over too. I decided to keep driving. My heart was pounding now. After a while, I took a sudden left turn onto a smaller road, hoping to lose them. But they followed me, keeping the same distance. The fear was building. I didn't know who was in that car or why they were following me. I turned off my headlights and took another sharp turn, trying to hide in the darkness. When I looked back, their lights were gone. Relieved, I sat there in silence, heart pounding, trying to breathe. But when I turned back onto the main road and checked my mirror, the headlights were there again. I drove straight to the nearest gas station, where it was lit up, with people around. When I pulled in, the car didn't follow. They drove off into the night, disappearing down the road. I never found out who it was, or what they wanted. But now, whenever I'm driving alone at night, I can't help but keep checking my mirror. About a year ago, I moved to a small town in upstate New York. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly the escape I needed from city life. One evening, I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. It was just after dusk, the streets empty and quiet. As I walked, I noticed a man a few blocks away. He was standing under a street lamp, just watching me. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone, so I kept going. But every time I looked back, he was still there. Eventually, I took a turn onto a side street, hoping to lose him. I didn't see him again for a while and tried to brush it off. After a few more blocks, I heard footsteps behind me. When I glanced back, There he was again. This time he was closer. Heart racing, I picked up my pace, trying to get to my apartment, hoping he'd just go away. But as I turned the corner onto my street, I saw him turn too. He was following me, no doubt now. I practically ran the last few steps to my building, and when I looked back, he was still walking, slowly, in my direction. I made it inside, slammed the door, locked it, and took a deep breath. I went over to my window to peek out onto the street, and I could see him standing across the street now, just looking up at my building. Minutes passed, but he didn't move. Finally, I called the police, explaining that someone was loitering outside my place, acting strange. They told me they'd send someone over and to stay inside. I stayed by the window, watching. About 10 minutes later, a police car pulled up, but by then, the man was gone. The officers looked around, checked the nearby streets, but there was no sign of him. After they left, I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was probably just a strange coincidence. But a few nights later, I spotted him again, standing at the end of the street, just watching my building. Every few days, he'd show up, always at night, always watching. Sometimes he'd stand under the streetlight. Other times, he'd just stand in the shadows. I could never catch him up close, and the police could never find him. To this day, I have no idea who he was or why he kept coming back. But every now and then, when I'm out late, I'll catch myself looking over my shoulder, hoping he's finally gone for good. Last winter, I went hiking alone in the Adirondacks. I planned to do a loop trail, nothing too challenging, just a chance to clear my head. It was quiet, a bit eerie with all the snow and the bare trees. About halfway through, I realized I'd lost my trail markers. I figured I'd backtrack a bit, but the snow had started covering my footprints. I tried not to panic, but I was definitely lost. I turned off my phone to conserve battery, and after a bit of wandering, I thought I heard someone in the distance. Relieved, I started calling out, hoping for a response. The sounds came closer, like footsteps crunching in the snow, but I still couldn't see anyone. Then, everything went silent. I stood there, waiting. Suddenly, the crunching started again, closer this time, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Heart pounding, I picked up the pace, hoping I'd find the trail. Then, I heard a voice, faint but distinct, calling my name. I froze. No one should know my name out here. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I ran, pushing through branches, ignoring the cuts on my face, until finally I found the trail. Once I got back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, but no one was there. I don't know who or what was out there that day, and I'm not planning to go back alone. Last summer, I was driving cross-country from New York to California. Somewhere in the Midwest, I took a wrong exit, and soon enough, I was completely off the main road. I wasn't lost exactly, but I was definitely out of my way. I hadn't seen any other cars for miles, so when headlights appeared behind me, I figured it was just another late traveler. The road was dark, just me and this car in the rear view. But then, the car started following a little too close. I slowed down to let it pass, but instead of passing, it slowed down too. I sped up, and it sped up. Felt strange, like the driver was purposely keeping pace with me. After about 10 minutes of this, I started feeling tense. I took a sharp right down a narrow road, hoping to lose them. The car behind me didn't hesitate, just turned with me. Now I was in full panic mode. I called the police, whispering into my phone, trying to describe the situation. The dispatcher told me to stay calm, to keep driving if I could, and that they'd send officers my way. For what felt like forever, I stayed on the phone, giving updates and directions. The other car was relentless, following me through every turn. Eventually, I spotted blue lights flashing up ahead. Relief washed over me. 2 police cars were waiting at a crossroads, blocking part of the road. I pulled over right in front of them, and the car behind me skidded to a stop. The officers got out, guns drawn, ordering the driver behind me to step out of his vehicle. It was a man in his 40s, scruffy-looking and unsteady on his feet. After they cuffed him, the officers came over to check on me. Turned out, he was wanted for multiple assaults in the area. They told me I'd made the right call, and that I was lucky he hadn't managed to get me alone. I've thought about that night a lot since then, how close I came to being another headline. Now, I don't ever take unfamiliar back roads, no matter how far out of the way I have to go. I used to work the night shift at a small, family-owned gas station in a quiet part of town. It was usually dead after midnight. Just me, the hum of the coolers, and the buzzing fluorescent lights. On one particular night, things were normal, until 2 men walked in around 2 a.m. They didn't buy anything. They just lingered by the door, whispering to each other. Something felt wrong immediately. They'd look over at me, then continue their quiet conversation, glancing around the store. I tried to act normal, pretending to check inventory and waiting for them to either buy something or leave. After a while, one of them walked up to the counter and started asking strange questions. How late we stayed open, how often people came in late, and whether we had security cameras. All alarms were going off in my head, but I forced a smile and answered casually, hoping they'd get bored and leave. But they didn't. Instead, the second guy started pacing the store, looking down each aisle and checking the back door. I reached under the counter, where we kept a button to call the police in case of emergencies. But just as I did, one of them caught my movement. He tilted his head, giving me a knowing look, and muttered something to his friend. My heart pounded. They both stepped closer to the counter. I realized they weren't here to buy anything. They were here to case the place, maybe even rob it. I kept my composure and casually glanced at the clock, hoping they'd take the hint that I was about to end my shift. Instead, they just grinned, as if they had all the time in the world. Finally, one of them leaned over and asked if I was alone. I stammered a quick no and mentioned my boss was in the back, trying to sound confident. But it was obvious they knew I was lying. Just as things started to feel like they'd escalate, the bell above the door rang. Another customer walked in, an older guy with a big coat and a tired look on his face. I'd never been so relieved to see a stranger. The 2 men exchanged a look, and after a tense moment, they turned and left. The older man stayed for a while, asking if everything was all right. I told him what had happened, and he waited with me until my shift ended. We called the police afterward, but the men were long gone. A few years back, I took on a temporary gig as a night security guard at a construction site on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a huge place, just a small, half-finished apartment building with fences surrounding it and a lone trailer for an office. Quiet job, just keeping an eye out for trespassers. One night, during my 3rd shift, I spotted movement on one of the security cameras. A man was weaving between the concrete pillars, heading toward the office trailer. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside, thinking he might be a worker who forgot something. But when I called out, he didn't answer. Instead, he froze in place, facing away from me. I got a bad feeling, but walked closer, keeping my flashlight steady. The man turned slowly, looking at me with a blank expression that didn't match someone who'd wandered onto the wrong property. I asked him to leave, and he mumbled something under his breath, something I couldn't catch. His eyes were glazed, and he started inching closer, with one hand tucked inside his jacket. Every instinct told me to back up. I radioed for backup, knowing it would take a few minutes for anyone to get there. I stepped back toward the trailer and he matched each step. Then, just when I thought he might pull something out of his coat, I heard sirens in the distance. He froze again, his gaze flicking toward the sound. He mumbled again, barely audible, then darted off into the shadows between the unfinished walls. When the police arrived, they combed the site but couldn't find him. Turns out there had been a few break-ins around the area, with some valuables stolen from nearby construction sites. The police said he'd likely come back again. Sure enough, 2 nights later, there he was, lurking again on camera. This time, the police managed to catch him. They found him carrying a bag with stolen tools from the last break-in. Knowing that strange figure wouldn't be lurking again was the biggest relief of all. A while back, I got a call from my buddy, Jake, who was house-sitting for his aunt. She had a big place on the edge of town, surrounded by woods, and asked him to keep an eye on it while she was away. It was supposed to be an easy job, but on the second night, something strange happened. Jake said he started hearing weird sounds coming from the backyard around midnight. It sounded like scratching and faint whispers. He brushed it off at first, thinking it might be the wind or animals. But the sounds kept getting louder, and eventually, they seemed to move closer to the house. It was unsettling, so he grabbed a flashlight and went to check it out. When he reached the back door, he saw muddy footprints on the deck. The prints were fresh, and they led to the side of the house where the basement windows were. Jake said his heart was pounding, but he felt he had to check the basement. So he took a deep breath and headed down the stairs. When he got down there, everything was dark and quiet. But then he noticed a window slightly ajar, just big enough for someone to slip through. As he shone his flashlight around, he spotted something in the corner. A pile of clothes, along with a strange, handwritten note. The note read, "I've been watching you." That was it. Nothing else. Jake immediately called the cops, and they did a full sweep of the property, finding no one. But the police assured him that whoever it was had likely left. The next morning, Jake found more footprints leading from the house back into the woods. He never figured out who had been lurking around, but he didn't stay another night to find out. The police kept a lookout in the area for a while, but they never found any sign of the intruder again. Whoever it was had disappeared into the woods as quietly as they'd come.